Part one was all about the variables of in setting up the experiment, and then part two we looked at how to set up our data table and create a graph and look for some key relationships in the graph. In this video, we're picking up where we left off in the last. We're going to be looking at the communicating and evaluating of the results of your investigation. And just a reminder, we're looking at seed germination. We've already looked at the results of the data collection, and we've presented our data in a graph, in a scatter plot. And now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to communicating the data. And so the format that we're going to use, the kind of organizer we're going to use, is a cause, mechanism, effect organizer. And it's pretty straightforward, this organizer. You can see, if you follow the numbers, you could start with the effect. This is kind of like the phenomena. This is the thing that we saw happen in our growth of our plants that can make us wonder, how did that happen? How did what caused this to happen? The cause over here is more just the basic what you set out to try to figure out. We change the amount of rock in soil, starting with 0%, then going to 50, then going to 100% of this tiny pumice rock. And then we tried to figure out what happened. And we noticed that as the amount of rock increases, so did the time it took for the seed to germinate. So after you've identified your effect and then your cause, the next part is to look at the mechanism. And the mechanism is basically your explanation for why and how the independent variable affected the dependent variable. So it's breaking apart really what happened to get from the cause to the effect. And in this case, the person that did this experiment is going to kind of try to focus on the scientific principle of how water acts inside of soils. And so when a soil is very coarse or has very big particles inside of it, the water tends to move through very quickly. Whereas the water in a soil that is very packed together, something like a soil with clay or with sand in it, the water tends to stay inside the soil for a longer period of time. And so this person is going to try to make a connection between this scientific principle and the fact that in a seed, you need one of the main things you need is water to be able to produce a germination. So by adding in both evidence from the experiment and evidence from outside sources related to topics in this area, this person is able to pull together an explanation for the cause and the effect. We're going to provide you with sentence frames to help you to figure out kind of how you're going to say things. But if you need help finding some type of scientific facts, or you need help pulling together your facts, obviously feel free to ask, to do a search, to do some research on your own, and that should solve a lot of the problems in this section here. Now if you need more space, feel free to write somewhere else. And now we're going to move down to the final part, which is the evaluation of the data. And in the evaluation, this person's going to try to think of as many ways that they could how they could improve the experiment. In what ways might have the experiment not been accurate? And every experiment, no matter from the kind of kindergarten experimenter to all the way to the expert experimenter, there's always places where the experiment could be improved. Even if it's just by a little bit in a small thing, there's always room for improvement. So your goal is to try to think of what are the biggest areas that could improve to make your data more accurate, and then try to think of ways that you could actually improve it if you did the experiment again. So just to give you an example of something that this person thought of in their investigation, they noticed that the time that they had to monitor the plants was not as consistent. They weren't always sitting there looking at the plants, and so when you're measuring in hours, you're not at school every hour of the day, and so you can't make judgments on when the germination happens. So they're going to try to figure out a way they could solve that. And one of the things they noticed is they could maybe use a camera to record the entire germination. The time that they start to the time when the germination occurs, they could then be able to better, more accurately say the time in which the seed germinates. So this is just one example of how you could You could think about it. It could be usually things related to measurement can be a really great place to think about. Things related to the procedure. How did you actually carry out the experiment? These could be good ways to think about it. And error on the part of the experimenter is something that actually adds to the scientific knowledge and doesn't take away from it. It shows that we are only human and we make mistakes, and when we make mistakes we just talk about them, and then when someone else looks at it they can do the experiment again and maybe avoid those mistakes. So don't be afraid to write down your mistakes in this section. They will not be held against you. In fact, they will be used in your favor.